we go. You all need to hit a button that says it's okay. All right, let's start with prayer. Dear God, we're ready to start a new study this week, and we know some of us, some that want to be here are unable to attend tonight. God, we ask that you will be in our presence. Guide us as we learn about this difficult book. Let it bless us as we grow in our faith and our knowledge. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so starting in the book of Revelation. So I'm going to ask you, what do you know about this book, or what are your thoughts about Revelation?
It's a vision that God gave to John the Revelator and told him he was banished to the island of Patmos in his last days, and he got a vision from God or heavens opened up and said, I think he said, come on up or something. Come and
Okay.
see. And then I'm not sure, but if he said, write this down, but he showed him all kinds of things that were going to be in
Okay.
that
All
period.
right. You've got some knowledge. You've got some definite knowledge there.
When you'll probably tell us, but when was Revelations written? Do they know when it was written?
Yeah, we'll get into that. We'll have to talk. We'll talk about it.
Okay.
First of all, I want to know but just your thoughts. You know, if you don't have a knowledge of it, what do you think about this book?
There's a lot of real wild description of things and what's going to happen and what's going on, and I think a lot of people it's almost scary at times of some of the visions, and I think a lot of people I don't think a lot of people really, I think a lot of people try to avoid Revelations, you know, as a book to read or study because it's so different.
Okay.
And it's just Revelation, not Revelations. There's no
Right.
S on the end.
Revelation.
No end.
That's what we know. That's one thing I know about the book.
Okay.
If you read it twice, so then you got Revelations.
I suppose, yeah. But it was just one revelation, one big long dream, what John saw. Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on Revelation? I heard the word scary from Dan.
So Kathy and I both talked about this a little bit, and both of us kind of said we didn't really know, just pieces that we kind of heard. It was sort of like you're either all in or you're not. And when the time comes, if you're not all in, then you're kind of done for.
Okay.
But I don't really know anything more.
Okay.
And not even sure if that's accurate. So.
Okay.
I think through the years, different people have tried to say Revelation means this or it means that, and they try to have it be a part of what's going on in the world right now. And I think more times than not, it's incorrect.
Okay. All right. So Revelation is this kind of some scary book. Any of you ever heard of the Left Behind series that came out probably 20 years ago now? It's been a while. Okay, that was a series of movies based on what one person thought Revelation was about. And I remember as a teenager being terrified of the rapture. And I always said, you know, I had all these brothers and sisters at my house, and once in a great while, I would come home from school and there would be nobody home. I think maybe it happened twice. I mean, I got 5 brothers and sisters. Mom's always there. She's a stay-at-home mom. And I can remember coming in the house and nobody was there. And I thought, oh my gosh, the rapture has occurred and I've been left behind. I was terrified. I really was scared. And then I heard somebody, slam a door or something. Oh, that was stupid. Why did I think that? But I mean, it was just a scary, scary thing. So I think a lot of times we're very much afraid to study Revelation because it's a mystery, and it sounds like awful things are happening. And and it helps. We wonder, are we the one that's going to make it? Or maybe we haven't done something right. So some of these are the things that sometimes people get with Revelation. So we're not even going to get to the book of Revelation tonight. We're just going to talk about the history. And I'm going to tell you, I am using Barclay, which is my favorite book to go to. And this is Barclay's interpretation, who is a very well-known scholar who took the Bible and put it in more simple terms. So if you haven't studied Greek, like I haven't, it's a little bit easier to understand. So this is according to Barclay, but also as I began to do research, and I've taught Revelation before, that there are as many different interpretations of Revelation as there are writers. So you can have, this is one interpretation of it. It's a pretty mainline interpretation, but there's a whole lot of other ones. This one makes the most sense to me. So I'm not saying this is the right way to read Revelation. This is a way to read it. So with that, so I hope that everybody that's joining this study will hear that at the beginning, and I'll probably say it more than once, that this is a way, and it gives me a lot of comfort, and it makes sense to read it this way. So
You're saying that from Barclay's interpretation.
From the, say that again?
You're saying it from the Barclay.
From the Barclay
Barclay's.
interpretation,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
From Barclay. So you can do lots of different ways. Okay, so we need to start first with finding out what a prophet is and what a prophetic book and apocalyptic book. So what's a prophet?
My understanding is that he speaks for God.
Okay. And does a prophet, they often say he speaks for God. Does he often bring things that are coming? Something predicting the future, kind of. If any of you think of any prophecies in the Bible.
Yeah, about Jesus coming and being, that comes from way back in the Old Testament, that they
Right.
prophesied that Jesus was going to occur.
All right. Isaiah was big, had a lot of prophecies about Jesus coming. Can you name me any prophets?
Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi.
Okay. All right. In the Bible, the Bible's divided. We have the history books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That's the law. Then we have the history, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd King, 1st and 2nd Samuel. Got those out of order. And then Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Those are the history books. Then we have the writings, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. And then we have prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, all the rest of the Old Testament are all prophets. All people speaking for God, bringing the word of God. See, the Bible's not written in chronological order. Those are prophets. Now, anybody remember how many years there were between the prophets, between Malachi and the New Testament?
400.
400 years?
400 years. Is that Catherine? Yeah, 400. And Dan too, 400 years. We've talked about that. But now, was God quiet during all that time?
Yeah.
Was he what?
quiet. Didn't speak through anybody.
He didn't speak. He didn't speak through anybody.
Didn't speak. But during that time, there was a whole lot of books called the Apocrypha. Have any of you ever heard of that? I don't think any of you, none of you in this group were raised Catholic. Now, in the Catholic Bible, I have, this isn't necessarily a Catholic Bible, this is my study Bible. And there's this whole section called the Deuterocanonical books of the Old Testament, the Apocryphal. And these are books that were written in between the New Testament and the Old Testament. And the Catholic Church uses them in their readings, but we don't necessarily use them because they don't have the authority of the rest of the Bible. But there's a lot of history books. But during that time, there was a lot of apocalyptic literature written. So which Revelation is one? Are there any other books of the Bible that made the Bible that have apocalyptic themes in it?
Daniel?
Daniel. Boy, Catherine, I'm glad you joined us.
Me too.
Daniel, she's going to be pushing my knowledge. Good. Daniel has got this apocalyptic. So here's the big difference between prophets and the apocalyptic literature. The prophets predicted things that were going to happen, God's judgment, but it was helping people to change in this world during this time period. Like there was a prophecy that the Babylonian captivity was going to happen and all the people were going to be taken out of Israel, but they were going to be restored and the evil was going to be defeated. Now the apocalyptic books don't have that same, they are divided into two ages, the time that is now and then the day of the Lord, or the coming, the time, the fulfillment of God's plan. So there's the time now, and life is too evil, they can never change. Then there's going to be this terrible trial or birth pains, and then there's going to be a new order.
You
And
say
so
now,
Yeah, what?
you say now, but you mean now as being back when it was
And they
written.
wrote that.
I mean the current time. In this life, I mean, we can look back. We've been in the current time, but there's going to be a time that this current time ends, and then it's going to be a new order, a new birth, a new world. See, the prophets didn't do that.
When it
They would
ends,
have. Go ahead. Did you say
When it-
something?
when it current time ends, that's the rapture.
Right.
And
Well, there's the rapture, there's the millennium, there's all kinds of things that we'll get into, but there's going to be an end. It's not going to be redemption in this time. It's not going to be people changing their ways. It's the end of time, and then a new time starts. And that's part of the apocalypse. It's a totally different way. And there's something else different about the apocalyptic, is that the prophets would all come and they would speak their word, and then someone would record it. All of the apocalyptic books, which there were many, we just don't have a lot of them, they were all written, because there's no way you could just hear this and understand it. You had to study it. It was written for the purpose of being able to study it and find out what's coming. So we've got that, the end of the world, a new, a terrible pain, trial, birth pains, and a new world. That's part of the apocalypse. So now let me check my notes again, make sure I'm on track. All right. So there's always a judgment time. And oftentimes then it's usually based, well, so we got to go back. So now we know what the apocalypse is. And this was for the Jewish people, because what were the Jewish people according to God?
Chosen people.
The chosen people. Now, we've talked about this before. what were they chosen for?
For God.
Okay, chosen for God, but we've talked about that they were chosen for responsibility, not privilege. They were the ones that were carrying the word of God. So in these apocalyptic books that were written, many of them during that 400 years between the Old and New Testament, it's all about how the Jews are going to be restored completely. And they're all coming from the ends of the earth to come together. And this judgment for most of these books is going to be against the Gentiles. And the Jews are going to take their rightful place as the leaders in the world. That's the apocalypse, that all of this is coming together. So that's the themes of all these apocalypses. They all have this part in common. So in the last days, or in the end times, or in the new order. Now, and there's lots of things we have to tell us about the themes. Let's see. So who knows anything about the kingdom of Israel? Who can tell me about the history of the nation? How about a famous king?
David.
David.
Saul.
There's David as a king. How many kings were there in the United Kingdom of Israel?
One at a time.
One at a time.
Yeah, I like that.
There was Saul, then there was David, Solomon.
Samuel.
There was Saul, there was David, there was Solomon. That's it. There were only the three kings, because what happened after Solomon was king? Well, first there was the nation of Israel. They weren't a nation, they were just more of a tribe, and they wanted a king. So before this they had judges, but they wanted a king. So Saul was the first king, and then he turned bad. God kicked him out. David took over. David had a son named Solomon. Solomon was the king, and then Solomon turned bad, and God said enough. So the nation of Israel divided. Then we have 10 tribes, which are the nation of Israel, and one tribe that's the nation of Judah. And they were fighting within themselves. And then eventually Babylon came and actually took everybody away out of Judah. So this apocalyptic literature is written to say there's going to be a day and a new order when all the Jews come back together in one nation. And it's not going to happen in this world and this time, because people are just too evil and it's never going to happen. So all these things are going to happen. But it's a message of hope for the Jews that were scattered all over the world, that at some point they're going to all come together. So that's where we have this theme.
Catherine's going to have to take over. Oh, no.
What?
You were frozen. I said, Catherine's going to have to take over.
Okay. All right. So this gives us the idea of what an apocalyptic book is. Now, Revelation is the only apocalyptic piece in the New Testament. So, and it's not necessary, it's not going to be just about the Jews. So now it's going to be about all Christians, but it's following the same pattern as these apocalypses before it. So this is not a new style. So we're just going to say that this is something that the writer of this knew about. All right, so now we're going to talk about the history. I'm going to answer Dan's question about when was the book written. I'm not going to get about who wrote it yet. We know it was John, but we'll have to talk about the kind of John. So anybody got any guesses when this book was written?
Probably after Jesus what rose from the dead.
Okay. So after Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension into heaven. Definitely yes. Anybody know any significant historical events that happened during the first century that would have been impacted the Christian faith, Christian community?
Is it the destruction of the temple?
There we go. That's the one I'm looking for. Do you know what year that was, Catherine?
70 AD.
Yep, 70 AD, the destruction of the temple. So a lot of things are placed in time around the destruction of the temple. So there's some authors that think that this happened right around the time or just before the destruction of the temple. But we're going to move past that. So let's look at some things that happened in the Roman Empire. We're going to find out in this book that Rome is referred to as Babylon, which was the vilest evil enemy of all Jews. So did the Roman Empire always have this negative impact on the Christian community?
The way you asked it, probably the answer is no.
Okay, you're good at reading me. All right, let's look back because we just we just studied the book of Acts. So can you remember what the Roman Empire, what Roman influence had on Paul's ministry? Can you remember any incidences where Rome intervened?
Rome was always trying to just be at sort of peace with the Jewish people, and as long as they were peaceful, they tried to get along.
Okay, so we remember if we remember our study of Acts, there were many times that the Jews were coming to get Paul, and it would be the Romans who would get him out of the city, and they were protecting him against these Jews that were trying to assassinate him. So they were not anti-Christian, they just wanted to keep peace. And what was it at the end of his life that Paul did that was eventually the end of his life? It ended, but what was it that he did that brought him to Rome at the end of his life?
He wanted to go in front of Caesar for his trial or his.
Okay. They were bringing him to Jerusalem to try him, these Jews that wanted him dead. And Paul knew that he was going to be killed. So he appealed to Caesar. And since he was a Roman citizen, they had to take him to Rome. So it actually prolonged his life for a while. So we have to talk a little bit about the Roman Empire so we can really begin to understand what's happening in Revelation. So in the Roman Empire, what kind of political system did the Roman Empire have?
My way or the highway?
Okay, well, actually not so much. Not so much. It was a republic. So what does that mean? It was a republic. I don't have any political science majors here. All right. So the republic, it was a representative government. It was not a democracy. The emperors were elected. They had to be responsible to the senators. A lot of our system even is based on the Roman Empire. So the emperor was not, in the beginning of this empire, was not a dictator, was not looking, we didn't think of the emperor as God.
Yeah.
They were a representative. And if we had this thing called Pax Romana, what does that mean?
Peace.
Pax?
Peace.
Peace. So there was a Roman peace through all of this whole Mediterranean, the whole major portion of the world. There was peace. And how did Rome achieve this?
Well, when they took over an area, they allowed the people to live their lives the way they were living. They were allowed to do what they were allowed to worship they wanted, as long as they didn't, they lived peacefully
Peaceful.
next to each other. As long as they didn't cause any trouble, they allowed them to worship and do the things the way they had before they were taken over.
Exactly. That was important because that was the success of Rome, is because they had this thing called syncretization, that whatever your religion was, that was okay. You could practice that. You don't have to worship the Roman emperor. You don't have to, as long as you remain peaceful and don't try to force your faith on somebody else's, you're okay. And then you had the Roman roads, so there was much more trade. It was really a pretty peaceful time in the world until we get to Julius Caesar, where there began to be Caesar worship. And it wasn't actually during Julius Caesar's life, it was after his life, when Augustus was in, that people wanted to start worshiping the emperor. See, it wasn't the emperor that demanded the worship, it was the people that wanted to burn incense for the emperor. So now it becomes a little bit political, that you would go into the whatever temple that they were building, and you had to have permission to build a temple, and you would go and burn incense to the emperor to show your loyalty to Rome because of this peace that had happened, because of the roads, because of all the good things. So then there was Augustus, and then it was the Romans. They kind of kept the rules, kind of kept moving a little bit, and eventually, well, you could build a temple to a living Roman emperor, and one thing that the Romans did is they never forced the Jews at this time to worship the emperor, because they knew that that would be very awful for them to have to even put a little incense to have another god, because they only had one. So the Jews let the Romans let the Jews continue their own religion. All right, so now we have the Emperor Caligula. And anybody ever hear of Caligula? No.
I've heard the word. I don't know anything about him, though. I know that I've heard it.
Okay, Caligula was just downright crazy. And he started that you had to worship the Roman emperor, and he was going to take and put his own picture in the Jewish temple.
Yeah, you told us this. That's where we've heard it.
Nope. That was Pontius Pilate that we talked about before. The Pontius Pilate put his statue up in the temple. This was different. Caligula, because Pontius Pilate was not going to be God just to be a presence in there. But Caligula wanted to be God, but fortunately he died before they ever got his picture up in the temple. So Caligula started this worship, but then there were a couple other good emperors in there. And then we have Nero. Now I'm sure you've heard of Nero. What's Nero famous for?
Burning the city.
Fiddling while Rome burned.
Fiddling while Rome burned. Okay. And also, what's he credited for in the Christian faith? Nero. Well, because of this great fire in Rome, Nero may have been the cause of it. We don't know how it was, but to take pressure off of him, he had to find a scapegoat. So who was a likely group of people that may have started this fire? Well, those Christians, they do human sacrifices, and they don't fit in with anybody else. And so everybody's already a little suspicious. You know what I mean by human sacrifice, why people thought about it?
Communion.
Communion. We eat the body and blood of Christ. So Nero goes, and people, so Nero says, it was the Christians, it was them, it's their fault. God is whoever judging us because of the Christians. So this is the first time the Christians were persecuted. When they started using them as human torches, when they started putting them in with the lions, all that stuff started with Nero. But Nero didn't ask them to worship him. He didn't have that. He was just looking for a scapegoat. So after Nero, there were a couple more emperors, Vespasian and Titus, who they were wise rulers. Things calmed down. So here's the time period. Let's see. Nero was from 56 to 68. So it was after Nero, the temple's destroyed. And then we start to have the Emperor Domitian, who comes in 81 AD, and he rules till 96. Now here is one of the most evil emperors, and he demanded.
What's
What?
his name again? What's his name again?
Domitian, Domitian. All right. So he demanded that there was Caesar worship. And if you didn't worship Caesar, then you weren't loyal to the Roman Empire. And then this is where the Christians were really started to be severely persecuted. So there's the time. This is the time when we're getting to Revelation. So before this time, Rome, except for the little thing with Nero and a couple years with Caligula, the Roman Empire really was a good thing for that area. And people thought, even though they kind of complained that they didn't have their self-rule, it still was good. But this is when things got really, really ugly, and how Rome now became the villain. So we are in about the year 90 to 95. So this is where we think that Revelation was written, between 90 and 95. So let's think about this. You're in the Christian community, and you've been just blamed for the burning of Rome some years before. And now you are forced to worship Caesar or die. And you have to make those choices. So what would you want to hear from someone who's going to help you through this difficult time?
You'd want to hear some things that, or you wouldn't have to die.
Okay, that would be the best.
If you did die, you would have eternal life.
Okay, you've got that. What else would you want to hear?
How to survive,
How to
How to live.
survive.
to live through that.
Okay, but you said live through that. So what does that mean?
Well, I guess like if you're going through a shorter, like now you would stock up. How do you prepare yourself to get past it?
All right. But when you keep saying that, the word I want to get is you want to know there's going to be an end. You don't want to think that the world is going to continue on exactly in the same way. You want to know there's going to be an end, and the people that are hurting you are somehow going to have to be held responsible for their actions. That's what I want to hear.
Sounds like today.
What was that, Catherine?
Sounds like today.
Sounds
Oh,
like today, right?
No, there's an end to the COVID, yeah.
We want to know there's an end to the COVID, that there's something is going to happen. So now let's compare this today. All right, so if you were a prophet, remember the difference between a prophet and apocalypse. What would the prophet say, and what would the apocalyptic person say? About COVID?
I think the prophet would say in year 2022, it's going to be over, or
Okay.
They hang in there.
Hang in there. Yeah. Okay. So you've got this, and the prophet would say, I think that's what we're hearing right now, our prophecies, that the COVID virus is not going to leave us, but it's not going to continue to interrupt our lives. It's going to be something we're going to be able to live with. This is where we're going to do. Life isn't going to change all that month, but we're going to get beyond it. That's a prophecy. What would the apocalyptic writer, how would they approach this?
You would probably say doom and gloom things. Like we're all gonna die.
Okay, so the virus is not going to leave. It's going to kill off
Yeah,
90% of the population,
something like that.
and the 10%, of us that survive, we're going to go through the virus ourselves, but we're going to get on the other side, and then the virus is going to be completely gone. It's going to be a whole new world with no virus. Do you see the difference between the prophecy and the apocalyptic? So that's where we're at. That's what Revelation is. And it's going to be a book. It's going to be something of hope to say this is going to happen. All right. So I know that's been a little hard to get through all of that. We had to get the little history of Rome. Okay, you got any questions about where we're writing, where we are?
Questions about,
What I just said about? I asked that very badly. Let me try that again. Do you have any questions about what I just said? How's that?
I understand that question.
Okay. All right. So we've got the Roman Empire still going. We have the Christians under severe persecution, hiding in various places. Now, the next thing we got to tell you about the apocalyptic literature. If I am writing you a letter about something that the government is going to punish you if they figure out what I'm talking about, am I going to write it straight, or am I going to write it in a code that you could understand, but the government might not be able to? Code. See, so some of these images, and I think every author that's writing about Revelation can pretty much agree on this, that there is a lot of symbolism that's used that we may not understand in today, but the people that were receiving the letter at the time would understand the symbols that were used.
Too bad Barclay didn't live back then. We'd be able to understand it completely, right?
That's right. That's right. So some of the symbolism there, they would go, oh yeah, we know what this is. So we're not going to be able to decipher everything out of it, but we're going to be able to get the themes. So those are the codes. So those are some of the things. So let's review again. So the apocalypse, there's the time we're living in. And then there's the new day, the new order that we're going to get through going through some terrible trial where everything is going to be new. And in this new order, everybody's going to get along, and it's going to be wonderful and beautiful and perfect. That's the apocalyptic literature. We cannot redeem this world. It's too evil. And it's going to be written in a code. It's going to be written down, intended for you to study and learn about it. It's not going to be something that's easy. Those are things that the apocalypse are. So with that, I know you're dragging. This is the hardest part. We'll get into the fun next week. So who wrote the book of Revelation?
John.
John. What John?
I don't know.
That's John's.
How about John the Baptist? How about John the disciple?
Well, it was definitely not John the Baptist,
He's
because
dead.
he was
Yeah,
dead.
he got beheaded. Yeah.
Yeah, he got beheaded. You know, his mother would often say to him, John, you know, you're just so involved in this. Just don't lose your head.
Oh, that's terrible.
That's terrible. Yeah. Just don't lose your head, John. Anyway, got to get you back on track here. All right. So John. All right. was it John the disciple?
Same John that wrote the book of John.
John that wrote the book of John, yeah.
Maybe.
Well, there's
Right.
some,
He would have been pretty old man to write it in the 80s, 90s.
okay, so let's think if he was a young man when Jesus was alive, I mean, maybe he was 18 as a disciple
When Jesus was 30.
when Jesus was 30. So that would mean that, 18 plus.
Well,
So
if he's 20, it's easy to figure.
he would have been in his 70s.
I would have been really old then.
Well, there were, when you say that, there have always been older people. I mean, there's not too many, but I bet there in those days, there were people that could have lived into their 90s. There were just a lot of diseases that took them before that. So John would have been an older man. He would have been in his 70s, maybe. All right, but here's some things that I couldn't tell you unless I read something. The book of Revelation and the book of John were both written in Greek by people for whom Greek was not their first language. You can tell by the writing style, like the Gospel of John was written in a very simplistic Greek. It was good grammar, well written, but the book of Revelation was written with a lot of grammatical errors in the Greek language. It was somebody who definitely was not a Greek scholar, who Greek was their second language. So the style of writing between the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation are very different. Although they both seem to have been someone that were Jewish, that they grew up with the same point of view, they definitely were not the same author. The Gospel of John and Revelation. Another thing, when we've studied a lot about Paul, when Paul would write a letter, what would he often start the letter with? I mean, dear so-and-so.
Greetings to.
Right. Would he often state his credentials?
Yes,
I, Paul the apostle, I was not the apostle, and he would often tell his stories, his credentials. We're going to find out that John in Revelation doesn't give any credentials. And if you were an apostle, you would certainly write that. So John was not John the apostle.
But is this book written as, it's not written as a letter.
No.
So, but you still think that it would have that at the beginning, even if it wasn't, okay.
Well, but you'd still put, because he talks about himself, it does. We will get into that it was John. Let me see, let me get back here. It said, my book here. I forgot. Hang on a second. Anyway, he said he was a brother. He was giving his credentials as a prophet, as someone that was a teacher, but he was not an apostle. He never says that. So that gives us the clue that he was not John the disciple. So we have
Being told that John wrote it.
he did.
what was that?
Why did we all grow up being told that John wrote it?
He did write it. It was only John Smith, not John Jones.
Right, it was John. It definitely was John. It just wasn't the John that was the disciple. Also, another thing, did John, in the Gospel of John, do we ever hear the name of John? What did he call himself?
the beloved disciple.
the beloved disciple, the disciple whom Jesus loved. He never, ever stated his own name in the book. And we've got this other John saying, yep, I am John, John the prophet, not John the apostle. So I don't think we didn't, it was written by John the somebody. It was some of the older translations called him John the Divine. Like in New York City, isn't there a St. John the Divine Cathedral? It's a huge cathedral, so St. John the Divine. But this was not John the Disciple. So let's think of everything we've learned tonight. So I'm going to ask you some questions because I don't want to get into Revelation because this is a lot to process tonight.
Were there other, John says he's a prophet, the one that wrote Revelation.
Yeah.
Are there any other prophets in the New Testament?
Well, what's a prophet?
He's the
Somebody-
fourth teller.
I'm just gonna-
No.
Fourth teller, someone bringing the word of God. There isn't any books of prophecy, no, in the New Testament, not like the Old Testament. We have the letters. It's different. All right. So we have this guy, John, who had a vision that we're going to look at. So tell me everything you know now about the style of the apocalyptic literature. This is a review, so I want you to just parrot back some of the things I told you.
It's the now, and it's the, something's gonna happen.
Okay, it's not fixing things in this time. This time will end, and then there's going to be a new day that comes. Okay, what else do you know?
I know he spoke to the different churches.
Okay, but that's part, but I want you to just tell me about apocalyptic literature first, so I know we understand the difference of what are some of the elements that are going to be in this book? That the two different time periods today.
We'll talk about an end.
An end. There's going to be an end, a definite end to the trials that we're going through. There's a life, there's trials we go through to get through. There's going to be an end and a good day.
It's like there are codes within it that the people of the time would recognize that we may not.
Okay, good. Is it a book to scare people?
Yes.
Was it
No,
written? Was it
think it's-
written for that purpose? To
I think it's
scare?
supposed to bring hope.
It's supposed to bring hope to the people who are in the midst of the tribulations and the trials. And we read it because it was not written for the Romans. It was not written for the people who were being the persecutors. This was written for the persecutees. Okay. And we know going through Rome that it was probably written in the 90 because that was the time where Caesar worship was demanded or they had to die. So that's why we're pretty sure about the time frame for this. All right. And now, how do we know that it wasn't John the Apostle that wrote this, but a different John?
You told us.
The
I know
style
it's
of
both.
the
Style of writing.
The style of writing.
Both were written in Greek, but this Greek wasn't very good.
Okay, right. They were both very definitely Jewish people that grew up, whose center was in Israel at some point in their lives where they grew up. They had the same basic point of view, but different skills in their Greek writing. Okay, I think we've got enough for that. So this was a dry one to go through. We will start reading Revelation next week. And I'm looking through, there's 22 chapters in Revelation. And I'm hoping that we can finish this by June.
That what?
By June, the end of June.
Hmm.
It's going to take a while to go through this, so we'll record it each week. But this week was very important to give us the background so we understand a little bit before we get into it. And also remember, if you want to read another book and get another point of view, there's many books out there. But I'll tell you, there was one back in the 70s. It was called The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, which was a really hot book at the time. Any of you familiar with that?
I
Heard of-
remember hearing about it, but I don't think I read it.
No, it was filled with saying in Revelation, this says this is going to happen, and this is what is happening in our world now. That it's going to be the Soviet Union is Babylon, and Soviet Union is going to come down from the north and going to do all these things. And this author very definitely put definite events in the world as to what's happening in Revelation. And what happened to the Soviet Union?
Hmm.
None of it came true. And he wasn't the first one to take Revelation and saying this event is happening, and then this is going to happen, and now look what's going to happen next week, and that rapture is imminent. It's going to happen any day now. And that's why I was terrified as a kid. So this is not what this book is. That author was wrong. I mean, here we are 50 years later, and we can say, yep, he was wrong because none of those events happened. It can't happen like that. So let's remember that as we're reading through it, that if you read any authors who say, this event is here, and then this event is going to happen, look where we are, look at the history, it's going to happen in this way, they're probably going to be wrong. Because that has happened throughout all of history. People have gone through Revelation and said, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and it doesn't. So we have to look at that and read Revelation according to that.
A little human interest. The author of Left Behind
Change course.
wrote a Vacation Bible School book along with my husband.
Oh,
Who was
And then-
that? Who's the author?
Hal Lindsey?
Was it?
No.
No,
No.
he didn't write Left Behind. I don't think, did he?
No,
Was it Max Lucado?
mm-mm.
No, no, not Max Lucado.
we mentioned it earlier.
I didn't mention the author because I can't remember who it was that wrote the Left Behind series.
Yancey's trying to find it. She's
Tim LaHaye and
Oh, Tim LaHaye.
Yeah,
Jerry Jenkins.
Was it Tim LaHaye?
Yeah.
and Tim LaHaye, we let him borrow a crib because they were having a baby, and it was a borrowing, and we never got it back.
No, that's not mentioned in his biography here.
Yeah,
You're
he
not
borrowed
mentioned in
a-
there at all.
That he borrowed a crib from Art and Dorothy Blakely? Not there? Okay, well, that we better write and get that straightened out. No, and I think that people that put these specific events and specific time in, I think they do a lot of damage. As I went one time there, used to go to the Gowanda nursing home, and I used to do a worship service there every so often. And there was this woman there, and I can't remember her name, but she was in her late 90s. And they had some preacher that was coming and telling them all about the events that were going to happen and about this Red Bull in the temple, and they better be saved or they were going to be left behind. And this woman was like 97, and she was just in tears. And she said, I've always thought I was a Christian, and I've always loved God, but I'm so afraid. And so I was able to calm her down, and we prayed together, and I talked about, I said, that's not necessarily the way it is. And we got through that. And then she was calm. And the next time I came to visit her, she was just fine. And she was sure of her salvation. I think she lived to 102. But she didn't have that again. But I thought, this man was there just scaring the bejeebers out of this poor, sweet, and just a sweet, wonderful woman who'd loved God her whole life. But he was saying, if you didn't do it my way. So we have to watch that we're not going to do damage by trying to take Revelation too literally through our own viewpoint, but look at it in a more broad way. That's the way I'm going to be approaching this study.
That somehow cults get formed that way on
That's right.
What's the one down in Central America, Jones and
Yeah.
I mean, they get a group and then they've had people that have come up with the, you might as well give all your money away and leave your jobs because, things are going to end in 20 years or something. So yeah, it can be pretty scary.
Right.
When back in the time when the people were deciding what books to include in the Bible, and there's different books included, isn't it controversial? People are saying, why did they include Revelation?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Martin Luther wanted Revelation out. Revelation, 2nd Peter, Jude, Hebrews, and James. And
Oh,
Martin Luther said Jesus Christ is not mentioned in Revelation. He had a list of the separate books that he didn't want included in the Bible. And
I had never heard the other ones. I knew that Revelation was, interesting.
yeah, Martin Luther hated James.
Oh, and Reggie Boutwell, I always bring it up. Reggie Boutwell was always a James person, and the works and I used to always bring that up in meetings, with Reggie and James. Reggie liked James.
Yep. Yeah, because Martin Luther thought James was works righteousness and it's grace alone. But there's a whole thing. But no, there's been several major people that really thought Revelation shouldn't be in the Bible. But it is. So we can get through it and we can look at that. I think anytime people use the Bible to scare people, I think it's a misuse. I mean, unless they're really doing something really awful and you say, you keep that up. But I think the Bible should be used as a means of love, an overwhelming love, rather than a book to be used as a means of fright. So there's my little sermon for the day. Okay, anybody got any questions? Okay, I'm going to end the recording. So we'll see you next week, and we'll get into the book of Revelation now that we got the dry backgrounds done.